Welcome, Age of Vintage Society. It's alive! Boris Karloff was and forever will be the master of horror. Beyond bringing to life Frankenstein's monster and the mummy, Karloff starred in hundreds of films, spanning multiple decades and genres. With his iconic look, deep and lisping voice, and chilling calm demeanour, Karloff has earned his spot at the top of the horror genre ladder. But there's a lot more to Karloff than just a monster in heavy boots. How Boris Karloff defined the golden age of horror. Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Boris Karloff, the master of horror. The Universal Monster series is arguably one of the most popular franchises in movie history. It also proves that the movie industry hasn't changed all that much in the last 40 or 50 years, as the Universal franchise was essentially the Marvel franchise of the mid-20th century. Most of the movies were connected to some degree, and they were very much marketed as a franchise of films. Along with fellow actors Lon Chaney, Bela Lugosi and Vincent Price, Boris Karloff is recognised as one of the true icons of horror cinema, and the actor most closely identified with the general public's perception of the monster from the classic Mary Shelley book Frankenstein. Whether terrifying moviegoers in one of his patented villainous roles or delighting generations of kids as the narrator of the 1966 holiday favourite How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Karloff always performed at the peak of his considerable abilities. With a workmanlike approach to his profession, he believed it was an actor's duty to act, although this attitude may have led Karloff appearing in some films of questionable merit, especially late in his career. It also kept the ageing actor relevant and active, while many of his horror movie contemporaries faded into obscurity. And while some actors lament being pigeonholed in spooky roles, Karloff was grateful for the genre and the fans who gave him fame and fortune. A half-century after his passing, his shadow still looms large in the public imagination, as Frankenstein's monster, as the mummy, as innumerable fiends and madmen. Boris Karloff's influence on horror cinema and pop culture as a whole is unparalleled. Described by those who knew him as dignified, warm and elegant, Boris Karloff lived a life of sublime contradiction. His definitive performance as the greatest movie monster of all time defined the golden age of horror, yet behind the iconic makeup of Universal's 1931 classic Frankenstein and the lifetime of sinister movie roles that made his career, Boris Karloff was anything but frightening. Beloved by his peers for his kindness and humour, the actor born William Henry Pratt was, above all, the consummate English gentleman. He was born in Camberwell, South London, on November 23, 1887, the youngest of 9 children by 5 years. Karloff grew up virtually an only child. His father, Edward John Pratt Jr., was a career diplomat who was seldom at home. Edward Pratt, a domineering Englishman of mixed Indian descent, was often critical of his son. Pratt spent his childhood years in Enfield in the county of Middlesex. Following his mother's death, was brought up by his elder siblings. As a child, he spent much of his time at the home of his friend Noel Hearns. He was very shy. He was a very lonely little boy. Bowed legs, a stammer and a lisp served to set Karloff apart from his peers. His dark complexion was also a frequent subject of discussion amongst his schoolmates. When asked about his suntan, Karloff, in an effort to hide his Indian heritage in the racist, upper-crust Victorian society, would good-naturedly quip that his colouring resulted from plenty of gin and a tight collar. He received his early education at Enfield Grammar School, and later at the private schools of Uppingham School and Merchant Taylors' School. After this he attended King's College London, where he took studies aimed at a career with the British government's consular service. However, in 1909 he left university without graduating and drifted, departing England for Canada, where he worked as a farm labourer and did various odd itinerant jobs until happening into acting. His brother, Sir John Thomas Pratt, became a distinguished British diplomat. He was bow-legged, had a lisp, and stuttered as a young boy. He conquered his stutter but not his lisp, which was noticeable all through his following career. While all of Billy's brothers had eventually followed in their father's footsteps and entered the diplomatic corps, one had briefly flirted with the theatre and had performed on the stage. When his career seemed at a dead end, he too joined the diplomatic service, but not before the seeds of performance had taken root within the heart of his baby brother. WHP, as he liked to refer to himself, had been smitten by the proverbial acting bug, and no amount of familial coercion could dissuade him from his chosen profession. By all accounts, the youngster was a kind, gentle boy who had little aptitude for or interest in the service. He was a dreamer with strikingly handsome features and a commanding voice. While his brothers chastised him repeatedly for choosing such a disreputable career rather than the honour of political service, Billy would not entertain any course but his own. Undeterred, 21-year-old Karloff collected about £100 bequeathed to him by his late mother, and let fate decide his destiny. In those days black sheep were exported to Canada or Australia. When I blithely flipped a coin in the family solicitor's office, the unfortunate losers were the Canadians, Karloff stated in a 1962 career retrospective. In 1909, aged 21, he used a £100 legacy to leave the country. When he arrived in the city, he had only $5 in his pocket. He later found work as a real estate broker. He also found himself a wife. Karloff eloped to Canada with his would-be first wife, Grace Harding. In Canada, he worked as a manual labourer for a while. With virtually no stage experience or prospects for finding work in the theatre, he eked out a meagre living in a variety of back-breaking jobs. The educated young Englishman took on paying labour that came his way, from digging ditches to laying railroad tracks. He had become obsessed with thoughts of a life in theatre, and read for every part that he could find. In 1911, Karloff joined a theatre group and travelled around Canada. He performed in theatrical roles with the Jean Russell Company. He had a brief stint at an opera house with another group, Harry St. Clair Company. He worked with different theatre groups in Canada and adopted his stage name Boris Karloff. His new bearing in life, however, had little effect on his ultimate ambitions, and his search for an acting job continued. He left his wife in the city while he made his way to join the company. I had finally become an actor, but I mumbled, bumbled, missed cues, rammed into furniture, and sent the director's blood pressure soaring, he admitted. For over a decade, Karloff made a living, initially as an extra and then as a character actor. 2 more wives came and went. He had divorced Grace in 1913, and in 1930 he married librarian Dorothy Stein. The couple would have 1 child, a daughter named Sarah Jane, who was born on 23rd of November 1938, her father's 51st birthday. One day in June 1931, Karloff entered the commissary at Universal Studio, where he was making the picture Graft. That day would change his life forever. Karloff stumbled across an ad for a theatrical agent located in nearby Seattle, Washington. "I was having lunch," Karloff explained, "and James Whale sent either the first assistant or maybe it was his secretary over to me and asked me to join him for a cup of coffee after lunch, which I did. He asked me if I would make a test for him tomorrow." "What for?" I asked. "For a damned awful monster," he said. Of course, I was delighted because it meant another job if I was able to land it. Actually, that's all it meant to me. At the same time, I felt rather hurt because at the time I had on very good straight makeup and my best suit, and he wanted to test me for a monster. Making the short trip to Seattle, Karloff concocted a complicated tale to get his foot in the door of the theatre scene, explaining that he was a successful actor of the London stage in Canada convalescing from a sickness. Karloff spun a tale of triumphant West End performances and critical accolades. Having fully recovered, he was now ready to conquer North America. Karloff left his axe in a tree and walked off the job. In 1917 he found himself in Los Angeles, in a district with the magic name of Hollywood. If you've always wanted to be a Hollywood star but haven't succeeded just yet, don't give up. Karloff wasn't in Frankenstein until he was 43, and as noted before, nobody even thought the movie would launch his career. Frankenstein is arguably the most popular of the Universal monster movies. It's arguably the most famous story, aside from maybe Dracula, and the monster could very well be the most popular anti-villain in movie history. The movie takes a gentle approach to its primary villain, portraying a mindless biological entity who is largely childish and who acts upon mere impulse and instinct. However, the monster was originally depicted as being far more violent and ruthless. It wasn't until the casting of Boris Karloff that its personality was significantly altered. His popularity following Frankenstein in the early 1930s was such that for a brief time he was billed simply as Karloff, or on some posters, Karloff the Uncanny. Although nobody expected him to become a star after being in Frankenstein, Karloff didn't get billing in the movie's promotion, and in the opening credits, a question mark was used to tell audiences who played Frankenstein's monster. While this was assumed to be a promotional gimmick, Sarah Karloff, Karloff's daughter, told BBC America that her father wasn't even invited to the premiere of the movie. After the success of Frankenstein, the studios naturally wanted to feature Karloff in further horror offerings, and in that decade alone he starred in such genre classics as The Mummy, The Ghoul, The Black Cat, The Raven, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein. Thanks to the runaway success of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff would never again toil in anonymous bit parts or work menial jobs to make ends meet. As one of the most famous movie stars in the world, he was billed in many of his films by his last name alone, an honour reserved for the likes of Rudolph Valentino and Greta Garbo. Although he would remain primarily a movie actor, Karloff would return to the stage from time to time, with varying degrees of success. In 1933 he became one of the 9 founding members of the Screen Actors Guild, established to look after the rights of movie actors. The union still exists today under the name SAG-AFTRA. It was started by 6 actors in March 1933, and within 3 months it has a board of directors that included Karloff, as well as James and Lucille Webster Gleason, Claude King and Morgan Wallace. He was always an advocate for actors' rights and had himself suffered at the hands of the studios. After shooting the famous lake scene in Frankenstein, for example, when the monster inadvertently drowns the little girl, the cast and crew returned to the studio. We went back to the studio in the evening to have some supper, and then back onto the back lot and worked all night until 5 in the morning. I had it, the makeup, on for over 25 hours. It was a long pull. In addition, Karloff was required to report to the studio at 4 a.m. in order for Jack Pierce to apply the makeup, which took over 4 hours, to be ready for the 9 a.m. start. At that time, neither the application nor the removal process, an hour and a half, was considered to be part of Karloff's working day. Although the movies would prove to be the mainstay of his career, Karloff would regularly appear on television and radio. His guest appearances would often play on his horror persona. He continued to work up until the end of his life. Despite being confined to a wheelchair and depending on an oxygen tank to breathe between takes, retirement was never an option for the ailing actor. "I am one of a small, lucky band of people who does what he loves," Karloff told the Los Angeles Times shortly before his death. "And so long as people put up with me, I'll work." Suffering from crippling arthritis and emphysema, which left him with the use of half of one of his lungs, Boris Karloff entered London's King Edward VII Hospital. Battling valiantly against the inevitable, the horror legend succumbed to pneumonia on February 2nd, 1969, at the age of 81. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Boris Karloff? Karloff fans will know that the British actor is going to define Frankenstein's monster forever.